now. Betsy Stone, it's all you.
Ta-da. So I like Deb, have to apologize for not being 100%. I sprained my ankle and I'm on lots of good medication. So when I lapse out of English, you really need to ask me what I meant and maybe I'll know. And so what I want to talk about today, what I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks a lot is the paradigms with which we approach the work. I have not done the youth mental health first aid training, because people keep telling me I don't have to do it, and that's fine. But when I think about mental health, what I think about is that we are really looking at so much of the work we do with teenagers from the vantage point of protecting them from mental illness, not truly mental health. So I want us to think about the paradigm that is a wellness paradigm versus a medical paradigm. Because most of us live and work in a medical paradigm world. That is the world that we find ourselves in. And I think it's important that we question some of the presumptions and assumptions that exist there. So I'm going to talk about a medical paradigm and a wellness paradigm on a number of different continua, and then I want to talk about kind of components of wellness. So a medical paradigm starts with the idea that Deb and I should both feel better. It starts with illness. It starts with a sprained ankle. It starts with a respiratory disease. It starts that when we think about medicine, we think about people who begin at a level of disability rather than begin at ability. And a wellness paradigm is actually much less focused on feeling better and much more focused on thriving. So that the moment of attention in a medical paradigm is when you fall down the stairs or when you're in that area of China, but not when nothing's wrong and you're just doing well. A wellness paradigm focuses on thriving, and it starts with the presumption that we are all able to thrive. Thriving is not the same thing as feeling better. And for me, if I start thinking about working with kids or working with teachers, feeling better starts from the disability. It starts from the struggle. It starts from the moment where I'm struggling with a kid or I'm struggling with the content. It doesn't start from the moment where I'm saying, what's the best way for us to go here? What am I working towards? It's actually, what am I working against? So thriving and feel better, first distinction between the paradigm. Second distinction, which probably it fits under the first one as well, is that in the medical paradigm, we treat and cure illness. And in a wellness paradigm, we maintain and improve health. So that in a medical paradigm, we are looking at illness as our enemy, as opposed to looking at health as our friend. Again, I think it leads us in different directions in the work that we do, hands-on and in a supervisory role. A medical paradigm is corrective. It's always corrective. Even in the moments that it's preventative, it's corrective. So when you go for, when you get a flu shot, that's corrective, even though it's preventative. It's all based on the idea of illness, not based on the idea of strength. A medical paradigm is, by its very nature, episodic as opposed to holistic. So that my relationship with my physician, my relationship with the pharmacy, my relationship with the emergency room, those are all episodic relationships that are, again, based on illness. They're not based on growing a person. And one of the things that this way of thinking helps me personally with is that I always think that the work that we do with adolescents, and frankly, the work that we do in our families, is to grow adults. And that our goal is not to necessarily simply to give information or to make somebody a better Jew. I don't ever know what that means. But to grow somebody who can use their Judaism to strengthen themselves. And that's holistic, it's not episodic. One of the struggles I think I have as an educator is how often the work feels episodic. And that's not my favorite kind of work. So I always want there to be some sense of continuity. That's holistic work as opposed to episodic. Another difference between a medical model and a medical paradigm and a wellness paradigm is that in a medical paradigm, the real responsibility lies in the medical provider. The power and the responsibility. So if I go to my physician and say, I think I have a sinus infection, it's her call whether or not I get treated. It's not my decision. It's my decision to make the offer to her to show up. But the responsibility and the power lies external to me. In a wellness paradigm, all the responsibility is mine. And the wellness paradigm focuses more on my willingness to exercise, eat right, diminish my stress, look at myself holistically rather than look at myself as a series of symptoms. And again, I think it shifts the way we do the work if we begin to see the responsibility and the power lying in the student and the teachers as students, as we all are, rather than I am responsible for getting this information in you. So in this webinar right now, I could either say, this is my job to tell you things and it is your job to passively listen, or I could say, what in this can you hear? How can you help yourself with this information, which puts the responsibility back in your court. And the last distinction that I want to make, and then I'm going to ask you how you can use this. So think about what I've just been saying, blah, 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 so fast. The last distinction is that a medical paradigm is chunks and compartmentalized. We go to different physicians for different things. And unless our physicians are really well coordinated, they may not actually know what other things are happening in our lives. So that if you're in a medical practice that isn't connected, for example, to the emergency room, that your doctor may not know if you go to an emergency room. The medical practices tend to be siloed. A wellness paradigm is in every aspect of my life. And so that if I'm thinking about wellness, I'm thinking about it in terms of how I behave and how I share information and what I do with information as it comes in. So the distinctions I've just drawn: feeling better versus thriving, treating and curing illness versus improving health, corrective versus preventative, episodic versus holistic, clinical responsibility, external responsibility versus internal responsibility, and siloed versus integrated. So I'm going to take a break now, and I'm going to ask you to think about how the paradigm a wellness paradigm might actually impact the way you think about the kids in your school, the teachers in your school, the people that you work with. And you have to unmute yourself. And I'm a shrink and I can outweigh you. So who's brave? Somebody want me to call on them? Do you see how we live in a medical paradigm kind of world? Okay. So Leanne, because you nodded your head, I'm sorry. You happen to be the one I see on nodding her head. Would you unmute yourself? And
I unmuted myself if you want me to go, Leanne.
Oh,
I would be happy to, because I am so deeply thinking about this. I can't even find words to talk about what I want to talk about. So I'm happy for you to start the conversation, Erica. And Betsy, just so you know, I am a nodder.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's not my, in fact, that's your problem.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So what were you thinking, Erica?
No, one of the things that I'm thinking, just reflecting on how JTEEN has morphed into a more expansive group of people doing a variety of roles with teens in the Jewish community. I'm kind of thinking that as we're looking at teen as a whole, we all understand that our teens aren't just spending time with us. They're spending time with others in the community. And how interesting would it be for us to start to think about others in the Jewish and non-Jewish community that are in these teens' lives as partners in moving our teens forward in a healthy way towards, early adulthood. So kind of, looking at what we do, but also who's touching our teens' lives, and how might we be able to collaborate in order to help provide them with the maximum number of opportunities, for them to participate in.
Great thought. And actually, one of the interesting things I think that happens when kids become teens is that they get increasingly siloed. And so your coach doesn't talk to your teachers, and nobody talks to parents. And so that kids have to begin to label the relationships, but they don't overlap. By contrast, in preschool and elementary school, all of our kids' relationships overlap a lot. And there's space for parents in other relationships. Parents can come to practice where parents of older kids are not really as welcome, or they have to stay back. So that the relationships that our kids are in become more siloed, and more siloed relationships tend not to be relationships that are oriented towards wellness. They're oriented towards achievement.
So now I really was nodding. And like Eric and I obviously work in a synagogue, and I was thinking about the relationships that we were talking about, that Erica was talking about, not just in thinking about who touches each of those kids' lives, but actively saying, like, if there's something that Eric needs to be aware of as the youth director, or the rabbi needs to be aware of, like, we have networks in this building and sometimes we don't use them properly without breaking confidence of kids, of course. Also, we do have a policy in CBS High that if parents want to come to classes and drop in, as long as they have to be the fly on the wall and not associate with the kids, or not interfere in the conversation. They have to sit in the background, mainly as observers or as information soaker-inners, so to speak. But where I draw the line on that is I won't let them do it if it's a class that's going to be detrimental to the kids speaking freely.
So, Leanne, have you ever offered a class for parents and kids together?
We're new, so no, we haven't yet. Not yet.
So if I were going to do that and to create it out of whole cloth, I would go for the jugular and try and do a class on evil, because and I would say to them up front, Hitler's off the table. We don't get to talk about Hitler, because that is actually way too easy. But I would do a class on the existence of evil, and I would start with texts looking at, we're made in the image of God, and there are bad people in the world, and I would have them do some Havruta work without working with their parents. You can't work with your own parent.
Right. I love that. Like I said, we're pretty new. I've only been doing it for 3 years, and our first battle was raising from 3 kids who came to now 24 kids who come. You know, like we
Yeah.
needed to build that critical mass before we could do that. And
Yeah.
but like I am saying, though, I think that all too often, especially in I imagine it's harder for you guys who do community schools because you don't have the same access to those people like that we do in the synagogue, where we take it for granted all the time. But there are lots of times when I should be like getting other people involved who can be helpful from the outside in.
And there's lots of times
for support and whatever.
Right. But even within a synagogue, you're siloed both within the synagogue and by the walls of the synagogue.
Yes.
And one of the things that Erica is raising for us that I think is important is that if we're thinking about our kids' wellness writ large, then we have to be thinking about them in all the arenas of their lives. And I wonder, we're going to talk about kind of dimensions of wellness, but I wonder whether or not, this is really off the top of my head, whether there would be an interesting activity to do to ask kids to take what are, I think there are 8 kinds of aspects of wellness, and to prioritize them for themselves and think about where they're really feeling wellness and feeling less wellness, both what matters to me and what I'm being successful at. I mean, I think there's a lesson plan in here, and there might be a series of a course in here.
Yeah.
So, any other comments? Any other thoughts?
I think most of the kids that come to my program are unwell. They walk into my doors unwell for so many reasons. You know, the homework, the sports, you know, everybody has the same issues, or they're the only kid that they know from their school, and they come in very stressed.
Mm-hmm.
They're there, you know, these are the kids that are there. And I think that half of my battle is for them to leave less stressed so that they do want to come back, because when they come to Kulanu, it's a place for them actually to unplug and unwind and talk and meditate and do yoga and play games. And, you know, of course it's within the context of the Jewish lens, but that's not really my priority. My priority is for them to actually feel better about themselves. So
most of us use the Jewish lens as an on-ramp to that, with that goal. That I think all of us would say our kids are phenomenally stressed. I'm really increasingly wondering how much of their stress is directly linked to lockdown drills, because it seems to me that literally every time you walk into the building, you have to say to yourself, I could die now. And think about how people behave when they get on airplanes, where they are much less likely to die than, for example, when they get in cars. But I really wonder whether or not this generation of lockdown drills has been a terrible disservice to kids. I am far from convinced it keeps anybody safer. But I think it traumatizes them over and over and over again. I think that so many of our kids are, Susan, coming to us for a place that feels safe, and that in many ways safety is the antithesis of stress. So that the relationships in which I feel safe are the relationships in which, even if I screw it up, even if something bad happens, I don't feel the stress as much because I'm safe. So I think safety is really important. I think for those of us who are able to hug kids and feel safe ourselves doing that, that's actually something a lot of our kids really desperately need. I think skin is really important if you can get away with it. And I think that's a wellness focus. I mean, the problem is for us, it's not a wellness focus. It's a medical focus. It's a responding to stress as opposed to creating a world where I feel less stressed. Thank you. Any other comments? Go, Deb.
I just was struck by this idea, and I value it, the fact that our teens are looking to the Jewish community for a safe haven, and their fear of the growing sense of anti-Semitism in the world, and their fear of being targeted when they're at a synagogue or when they're in a Jewish organization. I don't know what to do with it other than to recognize it and hope that we can continue to create safe havens even despite the news and despite recent trends.
So my sense, and you all will have to tell me if this is different in your communities, my sense is our kids are much more afraid of going to school than they are of going into a Jewish space. That they did not react to Pittsburgh the way the adults reacted to Pittsburgh. They didn't react to Poway the way the adults reacted to Poway. That we're more frightened about Jewish spaces and they're more frightened about secular spaces. And that we keep telling them they should be frightened about Jewish spaces. I don't know why we're telling them that, because I think they actually don't experience their Jewish spaces that way, even when they have to walk by police officers and even when in the places where they have to go through metal detectors. I just don't think they're experiencing it that way. Is anybody having a different, Danielle, you're muted, Danielle.
I was just going to say, we just recently had an incident in Houston where there was a school shooting at one of the high schools that the majority of my students attend. And I think you're absolutely correct. It wasn't the shooting itself that really triggered them and made them so angry and scared. It was actually the reaction by the school. And I think they feel that their Jewish institutions are being proactive and are making changes based on what we're seeing. And they don't feel their school was taking those steps. And so I think they're very upset about what happened, but the responses we were getting, I don't think would surprise you. Most of the students were telling me and the other youth professionals things like, we're not so surprised. We were just waiting for this to happen at our school. Or
and I don't think they feel that way in shul.
They don't. They really feel that we have taken steps and that it is still a safe space for them. And that if something happens, I think they will be more surprised in their, and I think in their synagogue, I think it would surprise them more. But they're still very angry with how their school has dealt with it since.
Right. So I think there's a lot of denial about both the risks in school and the lack of risks in synagogues. I think we overestimate the risks in school and maybe we underestimate the risks in synagogues, but that is what our kids are doing. And we don't have to worry, honestly, we don't have to worry about it, whether it's real, because what we have to really worry about is whether or not, is how they are responding. Any other comments before we go on? Okay, so when we think about wellness, we have to think about wellness in terms of 8 different components. And some of these apply more to our kids and some of them apply less to our kids. They all apply to all of us. And so the 8 different ones, and then we'll go over them, are emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, occupational, and social. Okay? So we're going to go over them. You're going to all say to me, these kids don't work, they don't have occupational. Yes, they do. They're all ambitiously trying to get into one of the Ivy League schools or something like that. That is a full-time job to be in that position. But, okay, so emotional wellness. Emotional wellness, it has to do with the ability to handle challenge. It has to do with resiliency, to some degree self-control of my own behavior, my own feelings and behaviors. And we know that adolescents aren't perfect at that, as opposed to adults who are, of course, perfect at that. But one of the things that we see in kids with emotional wellness is a sense of confidence that they can recover. Not that they will get it right, but that they can recover. Don't look for this at the moment when a kid's amygdala is all stirred up and they're irrational and crazy. You won't see it then. But when a kid begins to calm down, you will begin to see in a healthy, emotionally well kid that they can begin to put things in perspective. And perspective is a real important part of emotional wellness. We tend to tell people to have perspective when they don't. That is not very effective. It is much more useful to acknowledge people's perspective when they have it, rather than criticize people for lack of perspective when they don't. Because when I don't have perspective, telling me I don't have perspective does not give me perspective. People who are good at emotional wellness know how to engage in activities that actually calm them down, make them feel good. They know what they need to do to feel better. And those don't always have to be healthy things. So there are some amongst us who eat when they're anxious, for example. That is a way of calming oneself down. Is it psychologically healthy? Maybe not. Is it physically healthy? Maybe not. But what it is it is an example of emotional wellness in that I know myself and I know what helps me. So one of the things that we can do with our kids is to begin to help them think about, within their five senses, what do you do that helps you tamp down when you feel like you need to kind of come off of a high that's either positive or negative. So emotional wellness is confidence, some self-control, some resiliency, and skills at achieving that when I'm not there. This is the one that I think most of our kids would easily admit they don't have. These are the ones that Susan is talking about when they come in and they want to be psychologically or physically held. Because they don't know how to sedate themselves. And actually that is a really important skill. And one of the most important ways we can help kids learn how to do that is simply to talk about it. With your five senses, what would be the thing that you would do if you needed to calm down? What works for you? Different people, different places, you could talk about how that would be, those skills are different in different parts of your life, in those siloed arenas of your life. So you might be a person who takes a bath. You might be a person who goes for a walk. Well, you can't necessarily do that in the middle of school. So we want to kind of help people understand that if you're siloed, that different places require different responses from me. Okay? That's emotional wellness. Spiritual, is that a thought question? No. Okay. Spiritual wellness is I think one of the things that our supplemental schools are really lucky to be able to offer to kids. It's also something that synagogues are lucky to be able to offer to kids. Spiritual wellness is where we find meaning and purpose in our lives. We tend to do this by teaching tzedakah. I don't think that's actually individualized enough. I think that's more proscriptive and prescriptive and comes from outside rather than from inside. But the question, when do you feel spiritual, is a really different question. I think very few of our kids feel spiritual in services. I think a lot of our kids feel spiritual on retreats. And that one of the things we have to do is to help them figure out where there's meaning and purpose. What would meaning and purpose look like for you? And they would be different than what they looked like for me. So for some of us, it requires a lot of playfulness. For some of us, it requires a lot of solitude. And I think that one of the things that spiritual wellness allows for and helps us create is a sense of hope. And at that level, I think it's really important that we help our kids begin to understand that this kind of wellness is theirs to find. The question I might ask to get at this, it's not the five senses. The five senses I'm going to for emotional wellness. For spiritual wellness, I think I would ask the kids, when do you feel solid in yourself? When do you feel grounded in yourself? For some of them, the word spiritual may be really important. For others, the word spiritual may be too vague and abstract. And you have to use their language, not your language. Questions about spiritual wellness. Thoughts about spiritual wellness. Does anybody do anything currently that you think promotes spiritual wellness? So for some of our kids, for example, that might be in the writing of songs. What were you going to say, Danielle?
Well, you mentioned retreats. So we do include retreats within our within the Kahila High curriculum. It's important that we knew that creating opportunities for our students to bond and connect with each other and the clergy, educators, and staff outside of the weekly Wednesday night program would be important. And now we have a couple boys who come up to me weekly to let me know that they spend every Shabbat together unplugged. And so
wow.
I don't think they actually do, but they love it. They love the language. They really took that away from the retreat, this idea of unplugging. And whether or not it's just like an inside joke between us or they're actually doing it, they are thinking about Shabbat in a different way than they did before. And we had a beautiful global Shabbat in the Houston Jewish community. It is a BBYO initiative that was opened up to the greater Houston teen community. And it was truly a pluralistic Shabbat experience with teens of all Jewish backgrounds coming together. We had two services, 2 service options and dinner, and we gave them cell phone sleeping bags and used that same language of unplugging, disconnecting from outside and plugging into Shabbat. And
which is a wonderful way to the next step is plugging into you.
Yeah, exactly. And that would be really nice. We talked a lot about that. Our director of social action talked about Shabbat being that time to kind of plug into you. And now we're going to have JServe, which is our time to plug into the community and help.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And that we're going to come back to that kind of idea. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Third one, intellectual wellness. So intellectual wellness is when I know what I'm good at and I don't spend my time obsessing about what I'm bad at. It's actually when I am driven by my sense of my own skills and knowledge. For some of us, the intellectual wellness and the emotional wellness can actually go hand in hand. If, for example, you're a person who loves to do jigsaw puzzles, crossword puzzles, those are times where I'm actually going inside and but doing something that engages my brain, and that's a lovely pairing. So many of us say that instead that we are supposed to be good at everything as opposed to we're supposed to be good at what we're good at. And one of the things that I think, one of the deceptions I think that we often present to our kids is that they should be truly well-rounded. I don't think many adults are truly well-rounded. And if our goal is to grow adults and to grow healthy adults, one of the things we have to focus on and pay attention to is who you actually are and what you are actually good at. So none of us are going to play professional sports. And a truly well-rounded person can do that too. But I think it is really important for us to say to our kids, yes, you do need to know math, but if you're really good at languages, you're really good at languages. Let's celebrate the things we're good at and the places that we feel skilled, as opposed to just cutting down the places that we feel less skilled. And I think that in any conversation about our Jewish lives, we should really notice what kids are good at and what they bring to the table, as opposed to this is what I want you to learn. Physical. So physical wellness is impacted by all sorts of things. The world is full of options for us in terms of physical wellness, and we are very critical of people who are not invested in physical wellness. Physical wellness is, it's yoga, it's running, it's all the things that we do or feel guilty about not doing. It's going to the doctor when you need to. It also may have to do with the condition of the environment and our responses to the environment. And I think that we underemphasize how much teens need to burn off anxiety and stress, and that very often we take kids from a passive place to another passive place, as opposed to letting them make a transition that is physical, which for lots of them is much easier and works better, particularly for boys. And I think we have to really acknowledge that lots of boys need to burn energy, and that doesn't mean they're rotten, it just means they need to burn energy. I think, girls are better behaved in classrooms, but I think that's partly because we don't allow boys to do what they need to do. In a non-formal educational setting, I want boys to be able to move around, because I know they have to. So if that's that you give them a ball that they bounce, or a fidget, or something, or you just, run laps before you sit down to talk, I think that's important. Environmental wellness has to do with both clutter and danger and violence and all the things that we are exposed to when we leave the kind of nurturing silo of myself. So if it is that you live in a house with a hoarder, or that you're very tuned into global warming and climate change, all of these things impact our understanding of environmental wellness. And when a kid is really struggling with environmental issues, this is a wellness issue as well. And so we need to respond to them from the vantage point that there is a wellness component, and support them. We are really good at coming up with environmental solutions. That doesn't necessarily mean that we do anything about them. I think gardening, again, it can be a really incredibly important experience for kids, and one that allows them to understand that they have a direct impact on the world, and the world has a direct impact on them. I think that there is something that happens for some kids, not all kids, when they put their fingers in dirt that is truly spiritual, and one that we should be aware of and encourage. Okay, and so we have done the first 5: emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, and environmental. Any comments on any of those before I go on? Thoughts about any of those?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, combining, as you say, the spiritual and environmental, when we used to have a trip to Israel, one of the first things we did was plant trees.
Mm-hmm.
It became a very, very kind of emotional, spiritual time for the kids.
Absolutely. I think that
we actually planted our own seedlings.
Yes. Oh, you brought them?
No, the JNF had them, and each child, not only when they planted it, but they would say, I'm planting this in memory of somebody or in honor of somebody. So it even took a little bit more in terms of that spiritual part of them.
Absolutely. That's great. And I think that what we're beginning to see is that we can begin to put these things together so that yoga can be both spiritual and physical. And I think that is a really important aspect of the work that we do, that we need to be giving kids the opportunity to experience these different aspects of themselves, and seeing them in combination. Okay, number 6, financial wellness. Our kids are really worried about money. They are worried about college. They're worried about student loans. They're worried about not having all of what they want and all of what other people have. It is not atypical for kids, particularly in urban areas, to judge each other based on clothing, appearance, where you went on vacation, all that stuff. And it is really important for us that we actually notice that money matters. We very often think of money as being dirty, and we don't really want to talk about it. But our kids are really aware of it. I think that there are lots, and I think when they go off to college unprepared for the management of money that is part of becoming an adult. I think that there are lots of ways in which we can raise this issue to their consciousness. It's not simply a matter of teaching them how to balance the checkbook, which most of them will never, ever do. So that seems like a waste of time to me. But teaching them about credit, teaching them about paying people back. Look, there is great Torah text on debt. And I think that we can use some of the resources that are out there for us that are ancient texts as well as more modern ideas to begin to help them think about money and how it matters to them and what their relationship is with it. Because we all have a relationship with money. And it's both a relationship that's externally generated and a relationship that is internally maintained. And in a culture where you should buy at least a new blue shirt every year, because you should always have a new blue shirt and then a new yellow, whatever. There is a need for them to think about the replacement of objects and the maintenance of objects. And do you really need another phone? That is not a matter of whether you need another phone with a judgment. It's a matter of what's your relationship to that phone? What's your relationship to the cost of that phone and the maintenance of that phone? And again, we have the opportunity to raise these questions to consciousness. Number 7 is occupational wellness. Though not all of our children work for money, they all work in one way or another. And the issues that arise around occupational wellness, and think about this in terms of, for example, somebody who sits on a youth group board. They have to figure out how to balance work and leisure, work and other responsibilities. These are, occupational wellness is one of the tasks that all adults face, whether they work inside the home or outside the home. And part of our occupation is in caring for children. It also has to do with how we balance the needs of our children versus our own needs. I think that there are ways that we can begin to address this as something for kids to think about. I think that for lots of them, this is going to be the least relevant one at this point in their lives. But what we can talk to them about is questions of what a good job looks like and feels like. And that connects with intellectual wellness. There are people who have jobs. There are jobs that we have that are just to make money and to pay the rent. And there are jobs that we have that feed us. And occupational wellness allows for us to do work that feeds us. I think it is an interesting concept for kids to begin to think about what feeds you. And not that you should be fed by everything, and not that you should be fed by your mother or father's work, but by your own work. And I think that this is a question that kids have to struggle with and think about. And the final one, which really shouldn't be the final one, but is anyway, is social wellness. Social wellness is about creating a net for ourselves. It's about connectedness and belonging and having a healthy support network. It's about finding the people who run towards the fire rather than the people who run away. It's about finding the people who help you and care for you rather than the people who judge you. In most of the lives of our adolescents, they feel a need to run towards the kids who are mean rather than the kids who are kind. There is an article, Danielle, I put it on Facebook, and if you would distribute it to this group, I'd appreciate it. There's an article in the Atlantic magazine, I think this month, that is about what happens when we build kindness and generosity. And there's all sorts of enormously positive aspects of building kindness and generosity, which we tend to talk about but do nothing about. But when we build kindness and generosity, when we move towards the people who treat us well rather than the people who judge us, thank you. What we find is that those kids are stronger. They are more successful as adults in many measures of adult success. And they are more genuine, they are more authentic, and they are more respectful. So that we have to begin not just to talk about kindness, but to actually figure out ways in which we reward kindness, and the greatest reward is attention. So one of the things they talk about in this article that I think is actually a really simple and wonderful activity is to simply say to people, you could say this when the kids walk in the door, who were you kind to? Who was kind to you? They're equally valuable. Who were you kind to? Who was kind to you? I actually do this with my granddaughters before every meal. It's not something that their parents do, but when they're sitting down to eat with me, I say to them, who were you kind to? And then what I'm seeing is that they are now telling me at other times of the day, I was kind. Did you see I was kind? Well, I want them to brag about being kind. And I want all of our kids to be looking for kind people in the world, looking for the Mr. Rogers in the world, because those are the people who are going to build them and going to build them into wellness rather than build them from illness. So I leave you with a Ben Zoma quote, because it's the best one for this, which is, he says, who is rich? One who is satisfied with his lot. I hope that for all of us, we can create richness and wealth and depth in our kids and in ourselves. And I think that what it demands is a focus on not what's wrong, but what's right and what I need to grow to make it even more right. So comments, questions, thoughts, what are you going to do with this? I actually really want to know what you think you can do with what we've talked about over the course of this last hour. Deb, go ahead.
Well, so yes, and I'm having a lot of coffee shop conversations with groups of youth professionals. I'd love to bring this concept of 8 different types of wellnesses to them and discuss it with them. Is it in an article you have? Is there rather than watching a 45-minute?
I actually found this on the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, SAMHSA, which is a governmental website, and I lifted it directly. Right. And I think I think the thing to do with it, Deb, is to first have the conversation and then begin to think with them about how you could actually do this. In many ways, it feels to me as though it could be an 8-session course for educators.
Sure.
And youth professionals. So, but, play with how you would like to use it.
Thank you.
And if I can help, let me know, okay?
Sure.
Anybody else, what would you do with this information? What are you thinking about? Leanne, don't nod.
Betsy, I was just thinking that what I try to do is recognize things in young people that sometimes they don't recognize in themselves or don't really take pride in, even though they should or could. Mm-hmm. And so, asking them things that are going on in their lives and what kinds of things that they've done and sort of pushing them a bit to think about who they are in the world and helping them realize how important they are in the, in the landscape of their lives and in the lives of others. So like, you were kind to a friend, or you stood up to you stood up for somebody. Sometimes they do it just because, well, I guess that's I'm supposed to do it, or I feel compelled to do it, but they don't realize how significant that standing up for that other person may have been, not only in that moment, but may actually be in the rest of their lives. And so, just to kind of listen and help them realize how much impact they have, not only on their own lives, but on the lives of others.
There is this research, and I will look for it. I don't know if I can find it, but I will look for it, that somebody did someplace in the South where the teachers were randomly assigned to either give "you're a wonderful kid" response, or to give a "good work" response. And what they found was that the "you're a wonderful kid" response had a huge ripple effect for that child. And the "good work" response, which is what we tend to say, was very limited and didn't stick. Because if I did good work and then the next time I didn't do good work, then it doesn't matter that I did good work. But the "you're a wonderful kid" response actually lasted for a long period of time, like I'm thinking years. So I have to go back and find this. If I find it, I'll send it to Erica. Erica will send it to you all. I think that we underestimate the power of our positive words, and we overestimate the power of our negative words.
Betsy?
Yes.
This is Paula. I
Hi.
have a question. Just what you were just saying about "you're a wonderful kid" versus "you did good work." What it made me think of was when we say to someone, "You're so smart," versus you did good work, right? And we're supposed to say, I thought, right, like, "you did good work," because that the intelligence they can or can't control. I mean, they can't, right? But they can control how hard they work, right? But
Right.
then, like, you're saying sort of not exactly the opposite, but can you help me make sense of that?
Thank you for pointing that out, because you're absolutely right. I think that, I know in my Kishkas that the core thing that we have to offer is relationships. If I say to you, "you're so smart," what I'm saying to you is, this is what I value in you. And so if the feedback you get from me routinely is "you're so smart," what I'm saying to you is, this is what matters to me in you. It's what's happening in the space between you and me. And it's not about, and what I'm saying is, this is what I care about. What I want to do is to say, I don't want to say "you're so smart," because you're right, it is either fixed or unfixed. It doesn't really matter, but it's not something that I'm working on. "You're a great kid" is nice and vague, and isn't as specific as "you're so smart." It actually is only in the relationship between us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I'm not actually talking about your skills or your qualities. I'm talking about your gestalt.
Just who you are.
Yeah. When we go back, when I find this research, it will help us all if we can read it, and it'll clarify it. I think that what the problem with You're So Smart is that we tend to say You're So Smart over and over and over again and not say anything else. We don't say, the people who say You're So Smart are often not saying You're So Kind, because it's driven by their values, and that undercuts, that actually erases the importance of the kids' values, right? So Paula, I'm actually really good at conceptual math. I just don't care about it. And if you said to me, you're really good at calculus, I mean, not anymore, I'm sure, but what you're actually saying is that you value my ability to do conceptual math, as opposed to, do I value my ability to do conceptual math, which I don't.
Okay, so I could say,
that looks like something you can do. Do you like it?
Okay.
Right? As opposed to, you're so smart, which is fixed.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
The chatty boys, I'm teaching 6th and 7th graders right now. I have a lot of chatty boys. And the chatty boys in my class, and I teach them with their parents, and and one kid in particular, his parents say, oh, he's so frustrating. And then of course encourage him to misbehave in ways that they're complaining about. So I say to him, I know you have a good idea here. I know you have a good idea here. And so what I want you to do is I want you to figure out how your good idea fits with the person who speaks before you. Does that make sense? Bye, Deb. So that instead of saying to him either, shut up, or, which I've been very tempted by, or just ignoring him when he puts his hand up, I say to him, okay, I'm going to let Lauren go first, and I want you to integrate your idea with Lauren's idea.
Okay.
Which challenges him to do more.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Other comments, other ideas?
I was just thinking that using these as a basis, for example, for a senior seminar for seniors before they go off to college.
Wow.
I just sent a kid off to college, and me being the seasoned professional and seasoned mom that I am, totally let him, while I thought I had prepared him really well for everything, thought that everything was going to be great, he went to a college where he knew absolutely no one, and thought he had all the skills he needed, and he came home at Thanksgiving, everything seemed to be fine, and in December, the day before he got home, I got the email that no parent should ever get, that was catastrophizing lots of things that weren't really such catastrophes,
right?
But in his mind and in his experience, it was just all falling.
The world was coming to an end.
And then in January, he went back happily, changed everything he had been doing for a semester, and now he seems to be doing just fine. But
and Leanne, that's actually a really important story for kids to hear, because they need to know that, we have built college up. This is the best 4 years of your life. If that were true, then we would all have to kill ourselves at 22. They are not the best 4 years of your life. They are very challenging. And for lots of kids, they're very boring, because this is the one thing we never talk to kids about is how much free time they're going to have, which they've never had and they have no skills with. So I actually think that would be a really cool senior seminar. And I think that you could use text and you could use activities. And I think you could build something spectacular with this. And I want to see it when you do it. Okay.
And share it with your friends.
You guys will all be the first,
Okay.
And Danielle, that seminar, that part about the cooking in microwave cooking in mugs could go right along with this.
That's okay. Wait, I gotta speak to that. We totally been doing that this year, to Danielle's thing with that. And and
Thanks,
the
Mary.
main teacher was out. Or do you need to go? Do you want me to stop?
No, go.
Okay.
No, Barry just left.
Okay, and we need to, the main teacher was out, and the kids were saying, why are we doing this? Why are we cooking, like learning how to cook the microwave thing or whatever? And one of the kids said to the other, it's for self-care, so we can take care, because that's what the teacher's been saying to them for 2 years.
Yes.
Yeah, it was amazing. And the other one said, and we can help someone else who's maybe sick in the, if we have a friend in the dorm who's sick, we can make them something. So, call out the phone to you for bringing it to our attention. That
What
class.
a creative idea.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they talk about, like, the teacher says, like, so what's, I guess they do like the rosebud thorn thing to like start talking about what's going on in their lives. This is the senior class. They got a lot of stuff going on. Yeah. So it's been really good.
Wonderful. All right, we are over time. If you end up using this, Leanne, please show it to us. Invite me to, is it in Chicago that you're going for the next one? Invite me to Chicago. And I look forward to talking with you all again. Give me feedback if there's stuff you want to pursue with this. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We love you and we appreciate you, and we love that you're part of the network and part of our, not only our family, but also our learning community. We're all very blessed and appreciative.
Thank you. Thank you. So am I. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thanks.